My ex-husband called me 847 times in 3 years after our divorce. Every call was a threat dressed up as concern, a piece of poison wrapped in honey. He told me he would take the kids. He told me he would ruin my career. He told me no court would believe a word I said. And every single time he called, I pressed record. For 1,095 days, I built an archive of his voice, his threats, his slow descent from manipulation into menace. He thought I was too scared to fight back. He thought my silence was weakness. But on the 847th call, at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in February, he said one sentence, just one. And that single sentence was the reason a judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison. My name is Rachel Brennan. I am 39 years old. I live in a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where people leave Halloween decorations up until November and wave at each other from their driveways. I am a registered nurse. I work in the cardiac intensive care unit at a regional medical center, which means I spend my days keeping people alive during the worst hours of their lives. I am good at staying calm under pressure. I am good at watching a monitor and knowing, before the alarm even sounds, that something is about to go wrong. That skill, the ability to read the signs of an approaching crisis, is the only reason I am still here to tell you this story. I have 2 children. Emma is 12, Noah is 9. They are the entire reason my heart still beats. And, for 3 years, the man who fathered them spent every ounce of his energy trying to destroy the life I built to protect them. His name is Derek Brennan. We were married for 11 years. To understand how I ended up recording 847 phone calls, you need to understand how the marriage ended, and why the ending was not the end. It was only the beginning of something much worse. I married Derek when I was 26. He was 29, a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, which is actually how we met. He came to my hospital to demo a new line of infusion pumps. He was charming in the way that salesmen are charming, confident, attentive, quick with a compliment that felt personal rather than rehearsed. He remembered the name of every nurse on the floor after a single visit. He brought coffee for the whole unit. He made me feel, in those early days, like I was the most fascinating person he had ever encountered. I should have understood, even then, that a man whose entire profession is persuasion has spent his life learning how to make people feel exactly what he wants them to feel. But I was 26. I was lonely. I had spent my 20s working brutal hospital shifts while my friends got married and moved to the suburbs. And here was this handsome, attentive man who looked at me like I was a miracle. We dated for 8 months. We married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. The first 2 years were good, genuinely good. Then Emma was born, and something shifted. It was subtle at first. The compliments became less frequent. The attention turned into criticism. He would comment on how I looked after pregnancy, on how the house wasn't as clean as it used to be, on how I seemed more interested in the baby than in him. I told myself it was the stress of new parenthood. I told myself every couple goes through hard times. I told myself it would get better. It did not get better. Over the next 9 years, Derek's control tightened like a slow tourniquet. He took over the finances completely. He said it was because he was better with money, which was a lie. He simply wanted to make sure I never had access to enough cash to leave. He monitored my phone. He questioned every shift I picked up, every coworker I mentioned, every friend I tried to keep. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that, because for a long time, I used it as evidence that things weren't really that bad. He never raised a hand to me. He didn't need to. He used words, he used money, he used the children, he used my own self-doubt, which he cultivated like a garden, planting seeds of inadequacy and watering them daily until I genuinely believed I was lucky he stayed with me. The thing about psychological abuse is that it has no bruises. You cannot photograph it. You cannot show it to a friend and watch their face change. It lives in the space between words, in the tone of a question, in the silence after you say something he doesn't like. For years, I had no language for what was happening to me. I just knew that I felt smaller every year, that I had stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror, that I checked his face for his mood before I decided how to feel about my own day. The marriage ended on a Sunday in October. Noah was 6, Emma was 9. Derek had been drinking, which was happening more often, and we got into an argument about money. I had bought new shoes for the kids without asking him first. Their old ones had holes in them. He found the receipt and confronted me in the kitchen, and the things he said, the words he used, were so vicious that Emma came downstairs crying and asked him to stop. And he turned to our 9-year-old daughter and said something I will not repeat, something so cruel that it broke whatever was left of my paralysis. Because in that moment, I understood that his contempt was no longer contained to me. It was spreading to them. I filed for divorce the next week. I expected a war. What I got was something stranger, and in retrospect, more terrifying. Derek did not fight the divorce. He signed the papers with a smile. He agreed to a custody arrangement that gave me primary physical custody with him having every other weekend. He agreed to child support. He moved out of the house, which was in both our names, and let me keep it. To my divorce attorney, to my friends, to the judge, he appeared to be the picture of an amicable, cooperative ex-husband. And that was the trap. Because Derek understood something I didn't understand yet. He understood that the legal system is designed to respond to events, to documented incidents, to clear violations. It is not designed to respond to a slow, patient campaign of psychological terror conducted entirely over the phone. He understood that if he made a scene in court, he would lose. But if he made my life a quiet, private hell, one phone call at a time, there would be nothing for me to show anyone. Just a woman complaining that her ex-husband called too much. The first call came 3 days after the divorce was finalized. It was 7 p.m. The kids were doing homework. My phone rang, and his name appeared on the screen, and my stomach did the thing it always did. That cold clench of dread that 11 years of marriage had trained into my body. I answered because we shared children, and I had to. "Hi, Derek." "Hey, Rach." His voice was warm, friendly. "Just calling to check on the kids. How's Emma's science project coming?" It was a normal question, a reasonable question, the kind of question a co-parent might ask. And if it had stayed at that, none of what followed would have happened. But near the end of the call, after the pleasantries, after the questions about homework and soccer practice, his tone shifted, just slightly. "You know," he said, "I've been talking to a lawyer. He says the custody arrangement we agreed to isn't really fair to me. He thinks a judge would give me a lot more time, maybe even primary custody, especially given some of the things I could tell them about your, let's say, mental state during the marriage." There it was, the first thread of the web. I felt my pulse spike. "What are you talking about? My mental state was fine." "Was it, though?" He let the question hang. "All those nights you cried, the time you told me you couldn't do it anymore, the antidepressants. A judge might look at all that and wonder if you're really stable enough to have the kids most of the time. I'm just saying, I'd hate for it to come to that. So let's keep things friendly, okay? Let's make sure you keep being reasonable about things." And then, cheerfully, as if he hadn't just threatened to take my children, using my own private medical history as a weapon, he said, "Anyway, give the kids a hug for me. Love you guys." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone in my hand, shaking. The antidepressants he mentioned were a 6-month prescription I had taken 2 years earlier, prescribed by my doctor to help me cope with what I now understood was the trauma of living with him. He had framed my survival as evidence of my instability. He had taken the very wounds he inflicted and turned them into ammunition. I almost called my divorce attorney that night, but I stopped myself because I already knew what she would say. She would say there was nothing actionable. He hadn't made a specific threat. He hadn't violated the custody order. He had simply mentioned, in a friendly tone, that he had spoken to a lawyer and that he hoped I would remain reasonable. To anyone outside that phone call, it would sound like nothing. And that, I realized, standing in my kitchen with my heart pounding, was exactly the point. Derek had constructed a form of abuse that was invisible to everyone but me. He could terrorize me daily, and on paper, he would look like a concerned father making phone calls. The next morning, after I dropped the kids at school, I sat in my car in the parking lot and thought about what I was facing. I am a nurse. I think in terms of evidence, documentation, charts, and patterns. When a patient comes in with a vague complaint, you don't just treat the symptom. You document everything. You build a record. You track the progression over time until the pattern becomes undeniable. And I realized that if I was going to survive this, I needed to do the same thing. I needed to turn his invisible campaign into something visible, something documented, something a court could not ignore. Ohio is a one-party consent state. This is a legal fact that would become the foundation of everything that followed. In Ohio, you only need the consent of one party to a conversation in order to legally record it. And since I was a party to every phone call Derek made to me, I could legally record all of them. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not my divorce attorney, who handled the custody and the property division. A different lawyer. A woman named Patricia Vance, who specialized in domestic violence and stalking cases. I found her through a hotline for abuse survivors. I sat in her office and told her about the phone call, about the 11 years before it, about the slow erosion of myself that had no bruises and no police reports. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something that changed the course of my life. "Rachel, I believe you. And I'm going to tell you something that most people don't understand. Psychological abuse and post-separation harassment are real, and they are dangerous, but they are extraordinarily hard to prosecute because they happen in private and they accumulate slowly. A single phone call means nothing, but a pattern, a documented, time-stamped, recorded pattern over months or years, that is something a court has to reckon with. If you are willing to do the work, you can build a case that protects you and your children. But it will take patience. It will take discipline. And it will mean living inside the very thing that is hurting you, recording it instead of running from it." I asked her what I needed to do. She told me to install a call recording app on my phone, to record every single call from Derek, no exceptions, to keep a written log alongside the recordings, noting the date, the time, the duration, and a summary of what was said. To save every text message, every email, every voicemail. To never delete anything. And to never, ever let Derek know I was recording. Because the moment he knew, he would change his behavior, and the pattern would break. "Think of yourself as a documentarian," she said. "Your job is not to react. Your job is to record. Let him reveal himself. Patient people win these cases. Reactive people lose them." That night, I installed the app. I tested it 3 times to make sure it worked, and I began the longest, strangest, most disciplined project of my life. The recording started in October. By the end of that first month, I had 11 calls saved. By the end of the year, I had over 100. The early calls followed a pattern. Derek would open with something normal, a question about the kids, a comment about the weather, a piece of small talk designed to establish that he was just a reasonable man making a reasonable call. Then, somewhere in the middle, the threat would emerge. Sometimes it was about custody. Sometimes it was about money. Sometimes it was about my reputation. He told me he had friends at the hospital who would tell him if I ever did anything unprofessional. He told me he was keeping a journal of my parenting failures. He told me that if I ever dated anyone, he would make sure the kids knew their mother was a slut. And then, always, he would close with warmth, with love, with a casual reminder to hug the kids for him. The whiplash was the cruelest part. He would spend 10 minutes shredding my sense of safety, then sign off like a loving father. And if you only heard the beginning and the end of any single call, you would think he was a devoted dad. You had to hear the middle. And you had to hear all of them, in sequence, to understand what was really happening. I kept recording, I kept logging. I built a spreadsheet. Column A, call number. Column B, date. Column C, time. Column D, duration. Column E, summary of threats. Column F, my emotional state. I treated it like a clinical chart because that was the only way I could survive it. By turning my own terror into data, I created a small psychological distance between myself and the fear. I was not a victim cowering by the phone. I was a documentarian gathering evidence. The distinction kept me sane. I developed rituals around the recordings. The way you develop rituals around any task you must repeat hundreds of times. Before answering a call from Derek, I would take 3 slow breaths. The same breathing I taught my patients before a painful procedure. I would set my face into a mask of neutral calm, even though he could not see it, because I had learned that my voice betrayed my expression, and I needed my voice to stay flat. I would glance at the little red dot on my screen, confirm it was capturing, and only then say hello. After each call, I would walk to the kitchen, pour a glass of water, drink it slowly, and only then open the spreadsheet to log what had happened. The water was a way of marking the boundary, of telling my body that the call was over, that I could come back to myself now. These small rituals were the scaffolding that held me together across 3 years. Without them, I think I would have shattered. I also learned, over those months, to listen to Derek differently than I once had. During our marriage, I had listened to him the way prey listens to a predator, scanning every word for danger, contorting myself to avoid the next blow. Now I listened the way a detective listens to a wiretap. I noticed his patterns. I noticed that he was more dangerous after the children's birthdays and holidays, when the absence of his family hit him hardest. I noticed that he was calmer at the beginning of the month and more volatile at the end, which I eventually connected to his financial stress. I noticed which of my reactions fed him and which starved him. He wanted fear. He wanted tears. He wanted me to beg. So I gave him none of it. I gave him a flat, calm voice and a steady stream of recorded evidence. And the less I reacted, the more frustrated he became. And the more frustrated he became, the more he revealed. There were nights it almost broke me anyway. There was a call in the spring of the first year, call number 73, where Derek told me in detail about how he would testify that I neglected the children, how he would find coworkers willing to lie, how he would hire a private investigator to follow me until he found something, anything, to use against me. He spoke for 22 minutes. When the call ended, I sat on the floor of my bedroom and cried until I had nothing left. Then I wiped my face, opened my spreadsheet, and logged the call. Date, time, duration, summary, emotional state, devastated. And I saved the recording. Because the crying was for me, but the recording was for the judge. I learned to live a double life. By day, I was Rachel the nurse, calm and competent, saving lives in the cardiac ICU. By night, I was Rachel the documentarian, recording the slow-motion destruction of my peace. My children never knew. I protected them from all of it. When Derek called and I saw his name on the screen, I would smile at Emma and Noah, tell them I needed to take a quick call, and step into another room. I would press record, endure whatever he had to say, hang up, log it, and return to my children with a steady face and a warm voice. They never saw the fear. They never heard the threats. The only thing they knew was that Dad called sometimes, and Mom always seemed a little tired afterward. The second year was worse than the first. As the months passed and I continued to be, in Derek's words, reasonable, he grew bolder. He seemed to interpret my silence, my refusal to fight back, as proof that his strategy was working. He didn't realize that my silence was not surrender. It was patience. It was a hunter sitting perfectly still, waiting for the moment. The threats escalated in specificity. In the first year, he spoke in generalities, vague warnings about custody and reputation. In the second year, he began to name things. He told me he knew my work schedule. He told me he knew what car I drove and where I parked it. He told me he had driven past the house at night and seen the lights on in my bedroom. He told me he knew that Emma walked home from the bus stop alone on Tuesdays, a detail that made my blood freeze, because it meant he was watching not just me, but the children. I reported these specific incidents to Patricia. She told me to keep recording, and she helped me file for a civil protection order. We went to court. We presented some of the recordings, the ones with the most explicit threats. Derek showed up in a suit with his own lawyer and presented himself as a heartbroken father being persecuted by a bitter ex-wife. He claimed the recordings were taken out of context. He claimed he had never threatened anyone. He claimed that, as a co-parent, he had every right to know his children's schedules. The judge granted a limited protection order. Derek was ordered to stop driving past the house and to limit contact to matters directly involving the children. But the order had teeth only if he violated it in a provable way, and Derek was far too clever for that. He simply moved his harassment fully onto the phone, where it had always lived, where the protection order was hardest to enforce. That first court hearing taught me something important about how these cases work, and about why so many women in my position give up. I had walked into that courtroom believing that the recordings would be enough. I had months of evidence. I had Derek's voice, clear and undeniable, making threats. I thought any reasonable judge would hear it and act. But the law does not work the way ordinary morality works. A judge cannot punish a man for being frightening. A judge can only act on specific, provable violations of specific laws or orders. And Derek, the salesman, the manipulator, had spent his entire life learning exactly how far he could push a person while maintaining deniability. He had transferred that skill seamlessly from his marriage to his post-divorce campaign. Watching him in that courtroom, calm and reasonable and sympathetic in his good suit, I understood that I was not fighting a hothead who would eventually explode in public. I was fighting a strategist who understood the system as well as my lawyer did. The realization was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. It told me that the only way to beat a strategist was to be a better one, to be more patient, to document more thoroughly, to wait longer, to let his own discipline eventually fail him, as I believed, deep down, it someday would. After the hearing, Patricia sat with me in a small conference room and was honest with me in a way I needed. Rachel, I'm not going to lie to you. Today was a partial win, but it was also a preview of what we're up against. He's good. He's very good. Most abusers are not this controlled, and the ones who are not this controlled are easier to convict because they slip up in public, they violate orders, they get caught. Derek isn't going to make it easy. He's going to stay just inside the line for as long as his self-control holds. Our entire strategy depends on one belief, that his self-control will not hold forever. That the same rage driving this campaign will eventually drive him past the line. When that happens, and it will, the recordings we're building now will be the difference between a slap on the wrist and a prison sentence. So I need you to do the hardest thing I will ever ask a client to do. I need you to keep living next to this danger, recording it, instead of running from it. Can you do that? I told her I could. I did not know yet how much it would cost me. But I told her I could, and I meant it. The calls continued. Now they came at night. He learned that calling at 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m. was more effective because it caught me when I was tired and vulnerable, when my defenses were lowest. He would call and let it ring. He would call and hang up. He would call and breathe into the phone. And then he would call and talk, and the talk grew darker. By the middle of the second year, the financial threats and custody threats had begun to curdle into something more primal. He stopped pretending he wanted the children. He started saying he wanted me to suffer. He told me he would never let me be happy. He told me that as long as he was alive, I would never have a moment of peace. He told me he had nothing left to lose, which is the single most dangerous sentence a person in his position can say. Because a man who believes he has nothing left to lose is a man capable of anything. I knew this. I am a nurse. I have seen what happens when the people who say those words act on them. I have stood over the bodies. I increased my vigilance. I installed a security system with cameras. I changed my routine constantly. I taught Emma and Noah a code word that meant go to a neighbor's house right now and don't ask questions. I gave a copy of every recording to Patricia, and I gave another copy to my sister in case anything ever happened to me. I lived, in other words, like a woman who understood that the threat against her was real and escalating, even as the legal system told me that there was still, technically, nothing actionable. Patricia explained the cruel logic of it. The law, she said, generally requires a specific, credible threat of imminent harm before it can act decisively. Vague threats, even frightening ones, even an accumulating pattern of them, often fall into a legal gray zone. A man can tell you he wants you to suffer, that you'll never be happy, that he has nothing to lose, and a prosecutor may still say there is not enough for a serious charge, because none of it crosses the line into a specific threat to commit a specific act of violence. He's staying just inside the line, Patricia told me. He's smart. He's been smart this whole time. He gives you just enough to terrify you and not quite enough to convict him. But Rachel, men like this don't stay inside the line forever. The whole pattern is escalation. One day he will go too far. And when he does, you will have 3 years of recordings proving that it wasn't a one-time outburst. It was the culmination of a sustained campaign. That context is what will put him away. So keep recording. As awful as it is, keep recording. So I kept recording. Call 400. Call 500. Call 600. The numbers climbed. The spreadsheet grew. The folder of audio files swelled to gigabytes. 3 years of a man's voice, captured and cataloged, waiting. There were times I wanted to quit. There were times I wanted to throw my phone in the river, change my number, sell the house, and disappear with the children to another state. Patricia talked me out of it every time. She reminded me that fleeing would not stop a man like Derek. It would only delay him and weaken my case. Fleeing would make me look unstable, would jeopardize my custody, would hand him exactly the ammunition he wanted. The only path through, she insisted, was the patient one. Document. Endure. Wait for him to reveal his true face so completely that no judge, no jury, no prosecutor could look away. I want to tell you about the cost of those 3 years, because the part everyone focuses on is the dramatic ending. But the truth is that the ending was bought with 1,000 days of quiet suffering. I did not sleep well for 3 years. I jumped every time my phone rang. I developed a stress-related stomach condition. I lost 15 pounds I didn't have to lose. My hair started falling out. I went to therapy, where I learned that what I was experiencing had a name, post-separation abuse, and that it was a recognized and documented form of domestic violence, one that often intensifies after a relationship ends, because the abuser has lost the control they once had and will do almost anything to reclaim it. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Okafor, helped me understand that I was not crazy, that my fear was proportionate to a real threat, and that my decision to document rather than flee was, in her words, one of the most disciplined survival strategies she had ever witnessed. She also warned me, gently, that the most dangerous period in cases like mine is often the moment when the abuser senses he is finally losing control for good. That is when escalation can turn into action. I held on to that warning. I watched for the signs. And in the 3rd year, the signs began to appear. Derek lost his job. I learned this from the children, who mentioned that Dad seemed sad and was home a lot. A man who builds his identity on control and status, suddenly stripped of his career, is a man whose internal pressure is rising toward a breaking point. The calls changed character again. The strategic, calculated quality began to give way to something rawer, angrier, less controlled. He had always been careful. Now the carefulness was cracking. He started drinking on the calls. I could hear it in his voice, the slur, the looseness, the way the threats came faster and uglier. He told me on call 798 that he thought about me every day and that the thoughts were not good ones. He told me on call 812 that he had been watching the house and that he had seen a man's car in my driveway, which was not true. I was not dating anyone. But the paranoia in his voice was a new and frightening thing. He told me on call 830 that he sometimes sat in his car outside my workplace and imagined what he would say to me if he caught me alone. Each of these calls I recorded. Each of these calls I logged. Each of these calls I forwarded to Patricia, who had by now opened a line of communication with a detective in the local police department's domestic violence unit, a woman named Detective Sandra Reyes, who had reviewed portions of the archive and agreed that the pattern was deeply alarming. Detective Reyes told Patricia that she believed Derek was escalating toward a potential act of violence, and that the recordings were building a case, but that they still needed what she called the threshold event, a clear, unambiguous, recorded threat that crossed from menace into a prosecutable crime. In the weeks before the 847th call, I made preparations that, looking back, may have saved my life and the lives of my children. Detective Reyes had told Patricia that she believed an act of violence was approaching, and I took that warning with the seriousness of a nurse who has watched a monitor flatline. I sat Emma and Noah down and, without frightening them, reinforced our safety plan. I showed them again how to use the panic button on the security system. I confirmed that the code word still meant what it meant. I arranged with my next-door neighbor, a retired firefighter named Gerald, to be a designated safe house, and I gave him a quiet, honest summary of the situation so he would understand the stakes if my children ever appeared at his door. I kept my car backed into the driveway so I could leave quickly. I kept my phone charged to 100% every night. I kept a packed bag in the trunk. I was, in the language of my profession, prepping the crash cart before the code, gathering everything I would need before the emergency arrived, so that when it came, I would not have to think. I would only have to act. I also did something that I have never told anyone until now. I wrote letters to my children, sealed them, and gave them to my sister, with instructions that they were only to be opened if something happened to me. I did not believe I would die. But I am a nurse. I have spent my career in the presence of sudden, unfair death, and I know that belief is no protection against it. I wanted my children to have my words if Derek ever took my voice. Writing those letters was the loneliest hour of the entire 3 years. But it was also the moment I understood, fully and finally, that I was not being paranoid. The threat was real. The pattern was clear. The escalation was undeniable. And the documentarian in me, the part that had stayed calm through 846 phone calls, knew that we were approaching the end of the story, one way or another. We did not have to wait much longer. The 847th call came on a Tuesday night in February at 11:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because the timestamp is now part of the court record, and I have seen it printed in legal documents more times than I can count. I was already in bed. The children were asleep down the hall. The house was dark and quiet, the security cameras glowing their small green lights. The kind of silence that I had learned over 3 years to distrust. My phone lit up on the nightstand. Derek's name. My stomach clenched, the old, familiar dread. I almost didn't answer. It was late. I was exhausted. But I had a rule Patricia and I had established at the very beginning. I always answered. I always recorded. Because the call I didn't answer might be the call that mattered. So I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp, opened the recording app, watched the little red dot appear, confirming that it was capturing, and pressed answer. Hello, Derek. His breathing came first, heavy, wet. He had been drinking, more than usual. I could hear it in the silence before he spoke, a thick, swaying quality. Rachel. My name came out distorted, dragged. Rachel, Rachel, Rachel. It's late, Derek. The kids are asleep. What do you need? What do I need? He laughed, a low, ugly sound I had never heard from him before. What do I need? You ruined my life. You know that? You took my kids. You took my house. I lost my job because I couldn't focus. Because all I think about, all day, every day, is you, is what you did to me. Derek, don't. The word cracked through the line. Don't you dare. Don't you tell me you didn't do anything. You destroyed me. You took everything I had and you left me with nothing. And you think you get to just go on living your nice little life in my house with my kids while I rot? You think that's how this ends? My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady on the phone. 3 years of training. Record. Don't react. Let him reveal himself. Derek, you've been drinking. Let's talk tomorrow when... There isn't going to be a tomorrow for you. He said it quietly. That was the thing that froze the blood in my veins. He didn't shout it. He said it almost gently, almost tenderly, the way he used to say, I love you, in the early days. And then he said the sentence, the 847th call, the one that ended everything. I bought a gun yesterday, Rachel, and I'm going to come to that house, and I'm going to wait until the kids are at school, and I'm going to put a bullet in your head, and then I'm going to put one in mine, because if I can't have my family, then nobody gets to have you. I've already decided. It's already done. You're a dead woman. You just don't know it yet. The line was silent, except for his breathing. I sat in my bed, in the lamplight, in the quiet house with my sleeping children, and I felt a strange, terrible calm descend over me. The calm I feel in the ICU when a patient is crashing and everyone else is panicking. The calm of a person who has been preparing for a specific emergency for 3 years and now, finally, watches it arrive. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg. I kept my voice level because I needed to keep him talking, and because the red dot was still glowing, still capturing every word. Derek, you just said you bought a gun and you're going to kill me. I said it clearly, deliberately, for the recording. Is that what you're telling me? That's exactly what I'm telling you. His voice was thick with drink and certainty. I bought it at the gun show out on Route 23. Cash. I've got it right here. And I'm going to use it. You've got days, Rachel. Maybe a week. Enjoy them. And then, in a final, grotesque echo of 3 years of calls, he said, "Tell the kids I love them." And he hung up. I sat motionless for perhaps 10 seconds. Then I moved. 3 years of preparation collapsed into a single, fluid sequence of actions I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. I saved the recording. I immediately made a backup copy to my cloud account. I texted the audio file to Patricia and to my sister, and then I called 911. I told the dispatcher, in the calm, clinical voice I used to report a code, that my ex-husband had just called me and stated that he had purchased a firearm and intended to come to my home and murder me, that I had a recording of the threat, that there was a civil protection order on file, and that I had 2 minor children in the house. I gave them his name, his address, his vehicle description. I told them I worked in healthcare and understood the seriousness of what I was reporting. The dispatcher kept me on the line. Officers were dispatched to my home and simultaneously to Derek's apartment. Detective Reyes, whose information was already in the system because of the case Patricia had been building, was notified that night. The next hours were a blur of flashing lights and police officers in my living room, and a victim advocate sitting beside me on my couch, while I held a cup of tea I could not drink. Derek was arrested at his apartment at 3 a.m. When the police searched his residence pursuant to a warrant obtained on the basis of my recorded call, they found exactly what he had described. A handgun, purchased 2 days earlier at a gun show, the receipt still in the bag. Ammunition, and, taped to his refrigerator, a printout of my work schedule and a hand-drawn map of my neighborhood, with my house circled in red and notes about when the children left for school. The recording had not just captured a threat. It had captured a confession of a plan that the physical evidence then confirmed in chilling detail. This was no longer a vague, gray zone menace. This was a documented, corroborated, specific threat to commit murder, backed by the means, the planning, and a 3-year pattern of escalating harassment that established beyond any doubt that it was credible. Derek was charged with aggravated menacing, telephone harassment, violation of a protection order, and, most seriously, attempted aggravated murder was considered, though the charge that ultimately anchored the case was making a terroristic threat, combined with the weapons and stalking offenses. His bail was set high, and he could not make it. He sat in jail awaiting trial. His attorney tried, predictably, to argue that it was a drunken outburst, the words of an intoxicated, heartbroken man who never truly intended to act. That defense might have worked if the 847th call had existed in isolation. A single drunken threat, regrettable but perhaps not a true plan. But it did not exist in isolation. And this is the part of the story that matters most, the part I most want you to understand. When the case went to trial, Patricia and the prosecutor did not simply play the 847th call. They played the pattern. They walked the jury through 3 years of recordings. They started at call 1, the friendly check-in, with the buried threat about my mental state. And they moved forward through time, playing excerpts, showing the spreadsheet, showing the escalation in Derek's own voice, month by month, year by year. The jury heard a man transform across 3 years, from a smiling manipulator making veiled threats into a drunk, unemployed, obsessive man describing exactly how and when he would murder the mother of his children. They saw that the 847th call was not an aberration. It was a destination. It was the place that the road had been leading the entire time. And the recordings were the mile markers proving it. The prosecutor said something in her closing argument that I will never forget. She told the jury, "The defense wants you to believe this was a single bad night." But Rachel Brennan did not record one phone call. She recorded 847. She did not document one threat. She documented a campaign. For 3 years, while this man terrorized her, she did the hardest thing imaginable. She stayed calm. She pressed record. She built one call at a time, the very evidence that is now going to keep her and her children alive. The question before you is not whether the words on that final call were serious. The question is whether you will respect the 3 years of courage it took to capture them. I testified at the trial. It was the hardest day of my life, harder even than the night of the 847th call, because on that night, I had 3 years of training to carry me through, and on the witness stand, I had nothing to hide behind. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline, gently, methodically. The defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to paint me as a vindictive woman who had orchestrated the recordings to destroy an innocent man, who had goaded Derek, who had wanted this outcome. He asked me why, if I was truly afraid, I had answered every single call. He thought it was a trap. He thought a genuinely frightened woman would have let the phone ring. I looked at the jury when I answered, because Patricia had told me to speak to them, not to him. I said, "I answered every call because I am a nurse. When something is wrong with a patient, you do not look away from the monitor because the numbers frighten you. You watch more closely. You document everything. You stay calm so that someone can survive." For 3 years, my ex-husband was the emergency I could not look away from. I answered every call and I recorded every call because I understood that the evidence I was building might one day be the only thing standing between my children and a funeral. I was not goading him. I was charting him. And the chart is what told me, that night in February, that the code had finally come. The courtroom was very quiet when I finished. I saw one of the jurors, an older woman in the second row, wipe her eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They convicted Derek on every count. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to him. The judge said that in his years on the bench, he had rarely seen such clear, methodical documentation of a campaign of psychological abuse and escalating threat. He said that the recordings demonstrated not only Derek's guilt, but the extraordinary danger he posed, and that the victim's discipline in documenting the abuse had likely prevented a homicide. He sentenced Derek to 5 years in state prison, followed by a lengthy period of supervised release, a permanent no-contact order, and a prohibition on firearm possession for the rest of his life. 5 years. For 3 years of terror and one sentence spoken at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in February. As the bailiffs led Derek from the courtroom, he turned and looked at me, the way abusers always seem to turn and look in these final moments, searching my face for the fear that had fed him for so long. He did not find it. I looked back at him with the same calm I had maintained on 847 phone calls, the calm of a woman who had finally, after 3 years, set down a weight she had been carrying alone in the dark. He looked away first. The aftermath of a thing like this is quieter than people expect. There was no celebration. I did not feel triumphant. I felt mostly exhausted, in the bone-deep way of a person who has been holding her breath for 1,000 days and is only now allowed to exhale. I went home that night and slept, for the first time in 3 years, without my phone on the nightstand. I had it turned off in a drawer in another room. The silence was so complete that it woke me at 3 a.m., and I lay in the dark for a long time, listening to my children breathe down the hall, listening to the absence of dread, learning the unfamiliar shape of safety. The recovery took longer than the case. Trauma does not end when the threat does. For months, my body did not believe it was over. I still flinched when a phone rang. I still checked the security cameras 3 times before bed. I still woke at the slightest sound. Dr. Okafor helped me understand that this was normal, that my nervous system had been in a state of high alert for so long that it would take time to recalibrate, to learn that the danger had genuinely passed. Slowly, it did. The flinching faded, the sleep deepened. The dread, which had lived in my chest like a second heartbeat for 3 years, finally, gradually, quieted. Emma and Noah, in time, were told an age-appropriate version of the truth. That their father had done some very wrong things, that he had needed to face the consequences, that none of it was their fault, and that they were safe. I will not pretend that part was easy. They love their father, or at least they love the idea of him, the version of him that existed in their best moments. Helping them hold both the love and the truth has been the most delicate work of my life, and it is ongoing. But they are safe. That is the thing I hold on to. They are safe and they are loved, and they are growing up in a home where no one's mood dictates the weather, where the phone ringing at midnight is just a wrong number, where their mother is finally fully present instead of half listening for the next threat. I kept the recordings. All 847 of them. They live on an encrypted drive in a safe deposit box, alongside the protection orders and the court documents. I do not listen to them. I will never listen to them again. But I keep them because they are proof, not just of what Derek did, but of what I survived. Of the 3 years I spent turning my own terror into a weapon of justice, one disciplined act of documentation at a time. Sometimes, on the hardest nights, I think about the woman I was at 26, lonely in a hospital parking lot, dazzled by a charming salesman who remembered everyone's name. I wish I could go back and warn her. But then I think about the woman I became, the one who sat in her bed at 11:42 p.m. with a drunk man describing her murder in her ear, and who did not scream, did not break, but reached out with a steady hand and pressed record. And I think that woman, the one Derek created without ever meaning to, the one forged in 3 years of patient, disciplined survival, is someone I am proud to be. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. First, know the laws where you live. The fact that Ohio is a one-party consent state is the single legal reality that made everything possible. Learn the rules of evidence in your jurisdiction before you need them, not after. Second, understand that post-separation abuse is real. The end of a relationship is not the end of the danger. For some abusers, it is the beginning of the most dangerous period of all, because they have lost the control they are desperate to reclaim. If your ex will not let go, take it seriously. Third, document everything. I know how exhausting it is. I know that recording your own abuse means living inside it instead of fleeing it. But a single incident is a story one person tells. A documented pattern is a truth a court cannot ignore. Be the documentarian of your own survival. And finally, never mistake a patient woman for a powerless one. For 3 years, Derek thought my silence was weakness. He thought a woman who didn't fight back was a woman who couldn't. He never understood that I wasn't failing to fight. I was building the case. I was waiting for the moment. And the most dangerous person in any room is not the one who shouts the loudest. It is the one who stays calm, says nothing, and quietly presses record.